Hello, everybody. This is Moxie with Squibbler, and I'm going to talk to you today about creating dynamic characters. In this webinar, you're going to learn what character development is and why it's crucial. You're also going to hear from pro authors and screenwriters on their thoughts on character development. And then we'll have some tips for you about creating dynamic characters, and some of those tips will include how to use Squibbler's AI to create the best possible characters that you can. So, character development is creating believable characters who respond to conflict and change in realistic ways. Characters should be a rich tapestry of experiences that lead to the way they speak and act. E.M. Forrester said there are two types of characters, and we've sort of gone with his description for a long time. He says characters are either flat and undeveloped or round, that they're believable. And we also refer to these as static and dynamic characters. Static characters don't change during the course of a story or a book or a script, where dynamic characters do. They have a character arc and they change during the book. So some examples would be Voldemort versus Harry Potter. Voldemort does not change during the Harry Potter series. He remains the same, so he's static. But Harry Potter does. He learns how to control his magic, and he does develop throughout the novels. You also have the Who's versus the Grinch. The Who's are cheerful the whole way through, no matter what happens, no matter if all of their Christmas goodies get stolen. But the Grinch is the one who changes. He's dynamic. He learns a lesson. And then also with older literature, an example from a play would be like Claudius versus Hamlet. Claudius is devious the whole way through, but Hamlet has to learn who's killed his father, and he changes during the course of this as well. Why character development is crucial is that because credible characters help your reader stay engaged with your story. On the other hand, having flat or unbelievable characters can confuse and frustrate your reader, and you never want to do that. We also read about other people so we can see how they react to situations that we might never face, and we want these to be believable responses to things that we don't experience. So here are some tips from the pros, and then we'll move into some other tips that you can use and how you can use AI to develop your characters. So Neil Gaiman is not alone in this. He believes that characters are driven by desire. So he advises that you ask what your characters want, and then how are they going to get what they want, and what happens if they don't achieve what they want. So that's something to keep in mind. Margaret Atwood charts her characters' lives with world events. She often writes in different time periods, either in the far future or in the past, as she did with one of her novels as well. So she likes to chart world events and then how her characters will react. She also recommends letting someone who is like your character read your book and get feedback from them. So perhaps you have a character who might be very anxious or very angry. You can ask someone with those same characteristics to read your novel for you or your script and give you some feedback. James Patterson, he advises that we should create fresh characters who see the world in a new way. So you're not writing just some kind of stereotype of how we think people act. And both Patterson and Alan Moore suggest experiencing a scene like a character. Moore says he even sometimes looks in a mirror and pretends he is the character he's writing, which might be an interesting exercise for you as you're developing your characters. Patterson stresses that we can't just focus on primary characters, our protagonist or antagonist, that it's important that we also make engaging and believable secondary characters, because you don't want to pull your reader out of their belief of your story by having secondary characters that aren't believable. Salman Rushdie emphasizes that characters should have an independent reality and feel like they have an independent existence. And I love this quote from him. People say writing is a lonely occupation, but when your characters come to life, you're not alone. You feel like they're with you. So I thought that was a lovely quote. Alexander McCall says he carries a notebook with him to jot down interesting people and conversations when he's out in public. He imagines what people do and what they're like in their personal lives. And so he does a lot of observing of people. You do want to make sure your characters are interesting, because not all inciting incidents are going to interest all readers. N.K. Jemisin suggests that Will Smith's character in Independence Day is an example of an externally driven character, an everyman. And while not everybody is going to be interested in an alien invasion of the Earth, it's his character and his performance that keeps us watching. It's compelling enough for us to be interested in how he's going to react to this invasion of Earth. So here are some tips for you. One is to give characters goals and motivations. Characters do need clear goals. and motivations that drive their actions and decisions. And we need to know why they're doing what they're doing. What are they pursuing? And Kurt Vonnegut says every character should want something, even if it's just a glass of water. And I was thinking how this sounds very funny, but imagine if you're writing a Western and you have a character who's stranded in the desert. That character definitely would want a glass of water, and it could be a very stressful motivation for that character. So that's something to consider. Another tip is to show growth and change. Dynamic characters should evolve throughout the story. You want to show how their experiences shape and change them. Joyce Carol Oates says to make sure the stakes are high for your readers. And then she also advises that you're careful that you don't have too many goals for your reader, your character. You should make sure that you're focused on this. Anna Kent says that a good way to deepen your characters is to give characters inner struggles that conflict with the rest of the story. And your protagonist should have a character arc. You can also build inner conflict with Scribbler's rewrite function. You can use the more inner conflict feature if you're writing something that involves a lot of interiority for a character, a lot of inner thinking. Another tip is to create flaws. Perfect characters are boring. Nobody wants to watch that. You want to give your characters flaws that make them relatable and human. Flaws make characters interesting, good or bad flaws. They allow your characters to show vulnerability and weaknesses, and this also makes them more relatable and human. James Patterson gives an example with House, the TV series, how Dr. House is a very flawed character. He's an addict, but he's also a doctor. He does good things, but he does really awful things as well. And that compels us to keep watching his story. David Baldacci says we root for characters with flaws who are learning from their mistakes. And that's key. They need to be learning something. A lot of villains don't when you're watching films or you're reading a book. The villains stay static, but we like to see characters learning. He advises that writers make sure that sidekicks are not one-dimensional, and James Patterson says this as well with secondary characters. So make sure that if your primary character has a sidekick, they're not one-dimensional. And you can think too about villains. What makes a good villain? The famous poet says, William Blake says, the devil has all the good lines, which is kind of funny. Margaret Atwood says that our interest in villains is evolutionary, that we don't have to worry about stable people. So we're sort of naturally interested in villains, but they should also be well developed. They can't just be stereotypes. You do want to develop backstories for your characters. A well thought out backstory can provide depth and context to a character's actions and decisions. Rushdie points out that it can be very dramatic for a character to come very close to the thing he wants, but then not get it. So that's something to think about with a backstory as well. You can also develop your characters by adding descriptions and attributes with the elements feature in Squibbler, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at the end of this webinar. Another tip is to use dialogue to reveal personality. How we speak and how a character speaks reveals a lot about their personality, background, and emotional state. Neil Gaiman insists that dialogue is character. He talks about how his initial dialogue for Delirium in the Sandman series was all wrong, and he asked himself what he would do if he were a given character. That helps him to create better dialogue for his characters. A lot of the professional writers advise not to do too much research. You want to think about how you're representing your character with dialogue. Do they speak in longer sentences, or do they speak in short staccato ones? When we're angry, we tend to speak with shorter sentences. Each character has to have a distinct voice too. And ask yourself, is it realistic? Is it realistic for the character who's speaking? Is someone who was born up without an education, would they use large words in their vocabulary? Be very careful that the speech doesn't sound like you, that every character doesn't sound like the way you speak. They should have their own voices. And it might be important to keep a bit of vocabulary for each one of your characters so you remember their speech patterns. Another tip to build great characters is using show and not tell. So instead of telling the reader what a character is like, you need to show it through their actions, through their dialogue, and their interactions with other characters. According to David Mamet, the screenwriter, characters are what they do. It's not, they're necessarily just their backstory. It's not, we can't tell what they do. It has to be what they do. So one way you can accomplish this is in your revision with Squibbler's Rewrite. You can use the show not tell feature as well to revise your work. You do want to make sure that your characters are relatable. even if your character is in extraordinary circumstances. I always think about Ripley in the Alien series. We're not all in outer space fighting aliens, but we want to see how someone like that and how their emotions and struggles are, and if they're relatable, right? Do we believe her struggle? You can build your character also by illuminating them from different angles. Greg Moss says character develops the plot. A lot of people think the plot comes first, but he thinks that the character is what really pushes the plot forward. So that's something to consider too. It may be important if you have a character-driven story to kind of build on that organically. Another thing that you can do to build your great characters is to give them quirks and traits. Unique quirks, habits, and traits can make a character memorable and distinct. Jemison talks about manspreading and how people with less power tend to take up less space, which is a really interesting idea. Or maybe people who are not as sure of themselves take up less space. Rushdie argues that no character should just be sketched in. He says to write even minor characters with like a good idiosyncratic character actor in a movie scene. So it might help you to think of some famous character actors and how they behave. Even a horrible character can be compelling to read, like Nabokov's Humbert Humbert in Lolita. He's a horrible person, but you kind of can't stop reading because the way his voice is built is so compelling. You cannot always write books where good people are good and bad people are bad, because life is not like that. And I think a great example of this is from film, from Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, where Lady Eboshi is trying to save women who have been abused, but she's also cutting down the forests and killing the forest animals to create iron. So she's not totally good and she's not totally bad. She's a complex combination of both. Rushdie advises starting with something unusual about a character, the most unusual thing. So that might be another thing to consider as well. That has certainly worked well for a lot of novels and TV series. The series Monk comes to mind. You do want to create conflict for your characters. You want to put them in challenging situations that test their limits and force them to make difficult choices. Ian Rankin says that antagonists have to have incredible motivation. So your villains cannot just be one note. They can't be shallow. They can't be flat. He says that Hannibal is more interesting than Clarice in Silence of the Lambs because Hannibal is an agent of chaos. The few moments that he appears on the screen in the film is compelling. And indeed, Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar, a Best Supporting Oscar, for his performance. And it was a very short time on screen. You do want to use internal monologue for some of your characters if you feel like that's going to help develop them. Let your readers into your characters' thoughts to reveal their inner struggles and emotions. You can reveal characters through dialogue, interior monologue, and action. There's often a discrepancy between what characters and humans say and then what they end up doing. We are complicated animals, complicated species. You can create tension in third-person narration when a character says one thing and does another, and that's hypocrisy. And I think a good example of that would be from oh my goodness, I've lost the thought here. Anyway, there are lots of good examples of characters that do one thing and then another. Okay, you want to reflect real-life diversity. Include diverse characters with different backgrounds, cultures, and perspectives to enrich your story. Be cautious that you aren't replicating cliches of minorities or underrepresented cultures. Observe people that are not from your background. You want to, look at the world at large and see different body types from yours, different races from yours, different religious perspectives, political perspectives. There are a whole bunch of readers that are eager to hear or read about how someone like them would overcome adversity. So think about someone like a wheelchair user who's thrust into a really complicated situation, maybe in horror or in sci-fi. There's also a really good book on this that I recommend. It's called Writing the Other by Cynthia Ward and Nisi Shawl. So if this is something that you want to work on and improve in your own writing, this is a great resource for you. You do want to make sure your characters act consistently. Ensure that a character's actions align with their established personality and motivations. Alan Moore says to listen to your characters and allow them to have their integrity. You can't just flip a switch and change who they were at the beginning to the end. Editor Flora Reese says to watch for character inconsistency, dialogue that is too long, inconsistencies in the narrative, because these can all frustrate the reader. You want to use physical description wisely. These can hint at a character's personality and background and state of mind. And I always think this one from Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere is a great description that only hints at what is going on behind these two villains. There are 4 simple ways for the observant to tell Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandemar apart. First, Mr. Vandemar is 2.5 heads taller than Mr. Croup. Second, Mr. Croup has eyes of a faded china blue, while Mr. Vandemar's eyes are brown. Third, while Mr. Vandemar fashioned the rings he wears on his right hand out of the skulls of 4 ravens, Mr. Croup has no obvious jewelry. Fourth, Mr. Croup likes words, while Mr. Vandemar is always hungry. Also, they look nothing alike. So we don't know everything about how they look, but we can tell a little bit about what they wear, what they're interested in, what their eyes look like. And it gives us some hints, some insight into their character as well, to how they behave. You want to avoid stereotypes and cliches. N.K. Jemisin explains that trauma doesn't always look the way that we think it does. She gives the example of expectations of assault victims and how we think they should act on film or in books, crying and shaking. But she points out that some victims of trauma are very controlled. Alan Moore says to listen to what your characters are telling you. It's also important to make your villains well-rounded and that you understand what's inside your villains as well. They cannot be completely predictable, flat, static characters. All characters need to have an agenda, he says. Another way to develop great characters is to give them secrets. Secrets can add layers to a character and create tension and intrigue. One reason people still read Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter today is because of Hester Prynne's lingering secret, and that is who fathered her child. So that's kept us reading for a long time. In Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl, we find ourselves wondering why Amy Dunn stages her own death and frames her husband. We never really get a full answer to this. So that intrigue is something that really builds reader interest and keeps us hooked. You should be aware of genre expectations. For example, horror characters, when you're watching horror on film or reading about horror in book, they tend to be reactive and not active. They don't pursue a quest the way that we think of normal characters. Something usually comes after them. So in his writing In the Dark, which is a great book for horror writers, Tim Waggoner gives the example of Clive Barker's Midnight Meat Train, where the protagonist Leon is conquering a servant of darkness only to end up replacing him. So he's got this battle that he's fighting at the beginning, and then he becomes what Waggoner calls horror's tragic hero. So he's staying within the genre expectations here. So you might want to think about in the genre you're writing, what kind of characters are successful and why. You do want to show relationships. How characters interact with others can reveal a lot about their personality and growth. We learn a lot about, for example, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson from their interactions with each other. And Arthur Conan Doyle capitalizes on their being foils for each other, or opposites to each other. And you'll see that in a lot of film as well. Okay, so we do have a character worksheet that I'm going to show you in just a minute to help you develop your characters. And this will be available in the webinar with our resources forum on Discord. You can use the worksheet to develop your characters in any way you like, and then add the description and attributes into the Elements feature on Squibbler. So I'm going to show you what this looks like briefly. And so this is here for you. What you can do is just download it for yourself. You can start to build your character here. You can put their personality and quirks, their general description, their wants and needs, as we saw professional authors write about, their flaws, which we also saw that a lot of these professional writers that you've heard about say that is useful. You can talk about their background, as we've learned is also useful, their philosophical or religious worldview. And then when you're finished with this, you can start to use some of these attributes and characteristics in the element feature on character in Squibbler to develop your character. So the AI understands what you want out of your characters. Okay, so that is going to be in Discord for you. In this webinar, we have reviewed what character development is, why character development is crucial, professional authors and screenwriters and character development, and tips for writing dynamic characters with Squibbler's AI. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you for tuning in. Bye.